today's video, we will look at case control studies versus randomized controlled trials and the connection between association and causation with an example using cannabis use and low academic motivation. In the typical introductory 101 level college statistics course, the student is responsible for two types of study designs. We have observational studies and we have randomized experiments. The Stats 101 example of an observational study is the case control study. The Stats 101 example of the randomized experiment is the randomized, double-blind, placebo-controlled clinical trial. But nobody says that. They say RCT for randomized controlled trial. In observational studies, the study subjects, they have the right to choose. That's how you know it's an observational study. If they want to take a drug, it's their choice. If they want to take a vitamin, it's their choice. If they want to take a medical treatment, it's their choice too. In observational studies, researchers may never even meet their subjects in person. The researchers may only meet the subject's medical charts or death certificates, but they may meet their subjects. Let's design a simple case control study, but with a big research question. Why do some college students have low academic motivation? This is a big research question, but I'm interested in cannabis use. Let's start with a study population of 18 to 40-year-old college students from New York. I know New York well, so let's pick New York. Let's select a random sample of 500 college students from New York with low academic motivation. And let's just say they get paid to participate. Because, let's face it, college students, it's hard to get them to do anything without either giving them credit or extra credit or money. But we'll do this as a case control study. We'll sample until we get 500 college students with low academic motivation. That's the important thing. We have to start by identifying 500 college students with low academic motivation. Now, how would you determine low academic motivation? Well, there are inventories out there that have been validated for low academic motivation. But basically, a student with low academic motivation will buy the book, perhaps buy the calculator, but won't actually open the book and study from the book. And maybe the calculator isn't even taken out of the shrink wrap. But in the real world, when you measure an underlying psychological construct like academic motivation, there's always an inventory that already exists for this. And if no inventory exists for the underlying construct, before you use it, you have to subject the inventory to lots of testing to see if it meets the types of validity criteria that psychologists will demand and reliability and things like that. But I don't want to get too much into that. Let's just say we identify 500 college students with low academic motivation. Now, we are going to call these college students cases because we're interested in figuring out why some college students have low academic motivation and others don't. For each one of the cases, we're going to match each case with at least one student with normal academic motivation. And these students, they're called controls. Cases have low academic motivation, and controls have normal academic motivation. Sometimes we'll have one-to-one matching where we have one control for every case. We might have two-to-one matching where we have two controls for every case. And sometimes we do have three-to-one matching where we have three controls for every case. This is the researcher's choice, but the more controls we have, the better, really. Again, this is the researcher's choice. The next thing that the researchers do is they'll go on a fishing expedition to search for explanatory variables and risk factors that could explain why some college students have low academic motivation and others have normal academic motivation. With a case control study, we can explore now here's the important word, the association between cannabis use, because that's what I'm interested in, and low academic motivation. Now, it is really, really important when you're dealing with case control studies, you can only look for associations. You cannot ask the research question, does cannabis use cause low academic motivation? You cannot ask that research question in a case control study. The word association is so important. As an observational study, we don't take away the college student's right to choose whether or not to use the cannabis. Indeed, the choice of whether or not to use the cannabis can depend on other factors. And these other factors, they can be called lurking variables, confounding variables, or confounders for short, or correlates. This is super important in the observational study. One such variable could be the existence of a depression diagnosis. Yes, no. Before we continue, you must remember what scientists actually do. Scientists don't search for truth. If you want truth, find a guru on a mountain somewhere, meditate for 100 years. I don't know. If you want truth, find a religious leader or join some kind of a truth-seeking community. But scientists and science, it doesn't search for truth. Science search is for models. Models which explain and predict data. I'm not qualified to talk about truth in any philosophical sense, but I can test whether a model fits the data or whether there is significant lack of fit for observed data. That is what the statistician does, and that is what scientists who are honest about science admit that they do. They don't search for truth. Science searches for models. If it's a complicated model, it had better fit the data significantly better than the simple one. And that's where statistics comes in. Let's build a model for academic motivation. And this comes from real college students during a class discussion. One of my favorite classes with some really, really insightful students. We start with some basic demographic variables that are easy to obtain and not even that expensive. Let's start with age. And let's use two indicator variables. Age less than or equal to 20, yes, no. Age greater than or equal to 25, yes, no. So we have two age cut points, 20 and 25. This comes from my college students. It was their idea. But I have to ask you this question. If there are two cut points, how many categories do we have in this categorical variable? Very important in your Stats 1 class. Let's think about it. How many categories do you have for age? If you have two indicator variables, by the n-1 rule, we have three categories. We have age that's less than or equal to 20. We have age that's between 20 and 25. That's called the referent category. And we have age that's greater than 25. So we have three age categories. My college students also suggested that gender would be a good variable to have, and how to code that would depend on the population that you're interested in, and perhaps even the political culture that the study is being funded under. We might also want to look at where the college students live. Do they live in an urban environment? Well, we have an indicator variable for that. Yes, no. Do they live in a rural environment? Well, we have an indicator variable for that. Now we have two indicator variables, so we have three categories. If urban is no, and if rural is no, in the United States of America, we have a category called suburban. And if both of these indicator variables are no, the study subject would be in what we call in the United States suburbia. And that happens to be where I live. I live in suburbia. My college students also suggested we look at income, and we'll look at income under some cut point, again, an indicator variable. Now, I'll ask, why are we using indicator variables? Can you figure out why we're using indicator variables? The answer? It's perfect for logistic regression, which will give us adjusted odds ratios, which are some of the easiest statistics and most common statistics to interpret. Now, of course, we have to go a little further and get some variables that are not as easy, but still not that difficult to get. My college students suggested diet, and in our current political administration in the United States of America, we're actually starting to consider diet and exercise important to the health of younger people. But how do we measure these things? Well, the devil's in the details. Indicator variables are perfect for logistic regression, but I don't want to get too into this. What am I interested in? Cannabis use. Times per week? That sounds like a good place to start. Strain? My college students tell me that the strain of the cannabis is very important. And they've mentioned that there is more than just sativa and indica, but I don't want this video to get too into the weeds. And I guess that pun is intended because weed is a vernacular term for cannabis. Now, a depression diagnosis, yes, no, that would be very useful to have, as we discussed. Now, my college students suggested we get some variables that are even more difficult to obtain, but these are variables that could be very useful. They suggested cell phone exposure. Hours per month? Maybe we get the data plan? That would be useful, but again, you have to get the data. And more importantly, you have to be able to put this data into a Microsoft Excel file. The world runs on Microsoft Excel. My college students also suggested TikTok exposure. The idea is that, according to my college students, a TikTok addiction can occur in college students, and that can pull college students away from time studying because they're on TikTok instead. Great ideas. Now, we have a huge problem with observational studies. And this problem is that there can be what's called a confounding variable. A confounding variable. And this variable could cause cannabis use. For example, depression. A person who is depressed might have the desire to use cannabis as a means of self-medication. The depression could cause the person to want to use cannabis. But it's also reasonable that if a person is depressed, they might also have low academic motivation as a consequence of the depression. A depressed person might not be looking forward to opening up that statistics book, writing down all the definitions on flashcards, and on the back of each flashcard writing what the definition is, and having these flashcards to test themselves, to learn the vocabulary. They might not want to do that. And the messed up thing is that these causation arrows could potentially go in both directions. That makes a causal inference, again, that's that word cause, a causal inference fraught with so many potential difficulties because of confounding. Confounding is the huge problem with observational studies, and it is confounding that keeps us from being able to use that beautiful word, cause, in observational studies. So again, why can't we infer causation in observational studies? Because of these lurking variables, also known as confounding variables. So I would make a flashcard for this. On the front of the flashcard, I would say, why can't we infer causation in observational studies? And on the back of the flashcard, I would write, because of lurking variables or confounding variables. But wouldn't it be nice if we could take these potential lurking variables out of the picture? Well, there's a way. Enter the randomized experiment. In human experimental studies, researchers, they take away the study participants' right to choose and use computer algorithms to simulate, for example, flipping a coin and say, heads, the subject gets the drug, and tails, the subject gets the placebo. In human experimental studies, researchers take away the study participants' right to choose and use computer algorithms to simulate, for example, flipping a coin, and say heads, the subject gets the drug, like cannabis, say a vape, a chocolate, vanilla, strawberry cannabis vape with hints of coconut flavor. And tails, the subject gets the placebo. So that would be another vape, but instead of having actual ingredients from cannabis in the vape, in the placebo vape, it would still have the chocolate, vanilla, strawberry flavors with the hint of coconut. But the ingredients that make cannabis psychoactive would be absent from the placebo. In the United States of America, study participants are supposed to be provided with the risks and benefits of participation. And in the United States of America, an informed consent form needs to be signed by all the study participants. Research question. Does cannabis use cause low academic motivation? Now, I've framed this correctly. With the randomized controlled trial, we can use the word cause. We don't have to say, is cannabis use associated with low academic motivation? We can actually say, does cannabis use cause low academic motivation? So in the RCT, the randomized controlled trial, it is legitimate and valid to use the word cause. Now, the gold standard of medicine is the randomized, double-blind, placebo-controlled clinical trial, also known as the randomized controlled trial, RCT. The RCT is an example of a randomized experiment because we are randomly assigning the study participants to either the experimental group, where they get the cannabis vape, or the control group, where they get the placebo vape. It is the act of random assignment which allows the experimenter to test for a causal relationship between an exposure variable, such as getting cannabis, versus a placebo, and an outcome variable, such as low academic motivation. Importantly, this is an actual experiment. This is not an observational study, because in this, we are taking away the college student's right to choose, and the computer, through a simulation algorithm, decides which study participants are exposed to cannabis vaping and which study participants are exposed to placebo vaping. Since this is an experiment, we can use the terms independent variable and dependent variable. These terms should not be used in observational studies. Now, how would an RCT actually unfold? Researchers would first identify the population of interest, just like we did in the observational study. For example, we could have the same 18 to 40-year-old college students from New York. This would be called the study population. Researchers would then, now the verb is select, it's an important verb, to select a study sample. The research a study sample from the study population. In college-level statistics, we emphasize the utility of collecting a random sample, and this is a big deal. This means that every person in the study population has the same chance of ending up in the study sample. This is theoretically optimal, but it's often impractical or impossible to obtain. But there's a huge problem here because a great majority of the standard statistical methods are based on the assumption of random sampling. The next step in performing the RCT is random assignment. So we start with random sampling, but now we do random assignment. This is where we assign each study participant into the treatment groups which are also known as the study arms. And in our simple cannabis study, we have two study arms. We have the cannabis vaping arm, and we have the placebo vaping arm. Now, again, never use the terms independent variable and dependent variable in observational studies, but here in our RCT, they are perfect terms to use. These terms are for experimental studies where researchers, not the study participants, choose the values or levels of the independent variable. Now, in our simple study, can you figure out what the independent variable is? The independent variable is treatment, which is either cannabis or placebo. Again, these are vapes, with the chocolate vanilla with hints of coconut, cannabis versus a placebo vape. Possible to be done, certainly, yeah. The dependent variable, what do you think? Low academic motivation. Yes, no. And this is perfect for logistic regression, which will give us those adjusted odds ratios if we add some covariates. And this will give us raw odds ratios if we don't add any covariates into the model. In the RCT, the control group is often a placebo group, but sometimes placebos are impossible, like in a study of chiropractic treatments. Good luck in finding placebos for those types of medical interventions. Now, a placebo is often an inert substance which theoretically has no effect on living matter. If the experimental group is given a pill, then the placebo group is also given a pill. But it shouldn't be a sugar pill. Those are just one of the many lies they tell you in high school. They call a placebo a sugar pill. You see, patients in clinical trials have a tendency to crack the pill open and taste it. And if it tastes sweet, well, they'll know they're on the placebo and they may not comply with the protocol. So the pharmacist compounds a placebo that has a generally disagreeable taste, so it can pass as a pharmacological agent. I cannot say the D word on YouTube, so I will say pharmacological agent, but it's the D word. If the experimental group is given an injection, then the placebo group is also given an injection. If the experimental group is given a surgery, then the placebo group is what is called a sham surgery. They may go in, they may anesthetize the patient, they may cut the patient open, but they don't perform the actual procedure. And this is done in the United States of America. If you don't believe me, look up sham surgery and you will see This is given in the United States of America in clinical trials involving surgeries. Now, if the experimental group is vaping, then the placebo group is vaping an inert substance. The chocolate, vanilla, with hints of coconut vape that I was alluding to in our hypothetical study. Now, this is the big idea. By randomly assigning each study subject into the experimental group, for example, vaping cannabis, or the control group, for example, vaping an inert substance that smells like the experimental substance, the two groups are roughly similar with regard to every characteristic other than which treatment is given. The age distributions will be roughly the same in the experimental group compared to the control group. The gender distributions will be roughly similar. The genetic characteristics that we may or may not even know about will be roughly similar in the experimental and the placebo group, because the computer, when randomly assigning the study participants into the two arms of the study, this random algorithm does not discriminate. So this random assignment roughly balances all of these potential confounding variables, which would be part of the observational study. This allows the researchers to test for a causal relationship between treatment, experimental versus control, and outcome. In our case, the outcome is low academic motivation. Summary. The act of random assignment in randomized controlled trials roughly balances the uncontrolled factors between the treatment arms of the study, allowing practitioners to test for causation between independent and dependent variables. In observational studies, like case control studies, practitioners can only test for associations, not causations, between explanatory variables and response variables due to the potential existence of lurking variables.